Colossians. Jesus cannot be God because Scripture identifies Jesus as the firstborn over all creation.
Okay, so here we have to instruct Muslims, if they're the ones raising the objection,
Yep, they are the ones.
on what's going on in the Bible, right? Remember that the whole Old Testament was written to prepare us for what's happening in the New Testament. Jesus said if men didn't believe Moses, they won't believe him. And if they read Moses and believed Moses, then they would come to him, right? If they had learned from the Father through Moses, the revelation given to him, and the prophets, then they would come to Jesus. Paul in Galatians 2 tells us that the law was a schoolmaster to lead us to Christ. A schoolmaster was somebody who would train up a child for adulthood, preparing a child for his future work in the world. And so that's what the Old Testament is doing. The Old Testament is teaching us things that are going to be necessary to recognize the Messiah, to understand the significance of his person and work, and so forth. So if we ignore the Old Testament and then jump into the New and try and understand it without that background, well, then we're already frustrating our own efforts at properly understanding what's going on. The whole concept of a firstborn comes from the Old Testament. Paul's not speaking in a vacuum here. He's speaking in a context that understood what a firstborn was. Now, the term literally, right, derives from the fact that every family that, or every couple that has a first child, that's their firstborn, and that child then is the one who gets the lion's share of the inheritance. The reason that person would get the lion's share of the inheritance is that there's multiple reasons for this. One reason is because it was expected of the firstborn that he would take care of the family on the occasion of the father's death. He would be responsible for doing what the father did in that respect, taking care of his mother, taking care of his siblings, that sort of thing. It was also assumed that he was the one most responsible because, as in any family, when you have a first child, they usually learn responsibility in a way that the other children don't, because a lot of responsibility gets put on their shoulders, doesn't it? They have to watch their younger siblings. They have to put them in check when they're doing wrong, this sort of thing. So ordinarily speaking, the lion's share, the major portion of the inheritance would go to the firstborn. But in the special case of the righteous line, right, of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the firstborn child got even more the promised blessing that they would be the ones through whom the seed would come. Okay, the promised seed, the Messiah, who would defeat the tempter and bring salvation to mankind. Remember in Genesis 3:15, God says, I'll put enmity between you, speaking to Satan, and the woman, and between your seed and hers. He will crush your head, and you'll bruise his heel. That seed is going to come through the woman, into the world, and that promise is passed on from descendant to descendant. So in the case of Adam and Eve's children, you have Cain, you have Abel, you have Seth, and then other unnamed sons and daughters. Well, we're told that it's not going to be Cain, even though Cain was the firstborn, wasn't he? Cain was the firstborn, but he slew his brother Abel, who was righteous. And so that promise of the coming seed passes to Seth, who replaces Abel, whom Cain killed. Okay, so what we see here is even at the beginning of human history, whereas the concept of a firstborn would have normally gone to, just in terms of what the word means, would have gone to Cain. Cain forfeits this right, and it goes to Seth. So now Seth is the one who becomes preeminent, even though Seth wasn't born first. Okay, Seth wasn't born first, but he's preeminent over Cain. He's the one who gets the lion's share of the inheritance. He's the one who will be the progenitor of that future saving seed. Okay, that's the same thing we see happening over and over again. You have Abraham having two sons, Ishmael and Isaac, and other unnamed sons through Keturah. But the blessing and the promise doesn't go to Ishmael, it goes to Isaac. The same thing happens with Isaac's children, Esau and Jacob. Esau's born first, but God bypasses Esau because he was a wicked man and confers this blessing on Jacob. Okay, so although the term firstborn literally means the one that's born first, it comes to refer really to the son to whom the promises belong, to whom the blessings are given. And that means he's the preeminent one. You see this as well when Jacob blesses his 12 sons. Remember in Genesis 49, he blesses them, and he speaks of Reuben, who was his literal firstborn. But Reuben is set aside because Reuben committed a sin that his father is now discounting him. He's setting him aside for this blessing. And then he also sets aside Simeon and Levi because of their sin, right? Their particular sins. Now, it's not as if Judah didn't sin, but Judah was a righteous person. So he was the fourth child born. And he especially is noted for rescuing Joseph from the treachery of his brothers, right? Judah is responsible for rescuing. Remember, the brothers wanted to kill him, but Judah devises a plan that gets him out of their clutches, and he says, why don't we sell him instead? It's not that it's desirable to sell him into slavery, but he's doing this in order to rescue him from the murderous plots of his brothers who wanted to kill him. Well, so the point here is then that the term firstborn takes on the technical designation of somebody who is preeminent, right? Somebody who has the supremacy, who is superior in this sense. So with this understanding in mind from the Old Testament, when you go back to Colossians 1 and read it, notice what it says. It's very clear from the context. This is how Paul is using the word in Colossians 1. He says, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For, note the word for, the word for, you should always ask, what is the word for, therefore, right? Why is it there? What does it mean? It's giving you the explanation. It's telling you why he is the firstborn over all creation. Okay, and by the way, the Greek I think is better rendered firstborn over all creation, but either way, the expression I'm arguing is an expression referring to his preeminence. So notice the explanatory statement in verse 16. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Okay, so here Paul is saying he is the firstborn, for by him all things were created. So if the term means preeminent, this makes sense. He is firstborn over all things because everything was created by him. Therefore, naturally, he is preeminent over all things, right? But notice this as well. This is going to tie in with my last answer to 1 Corinthians 15, because he's also firstborn in another sense, preeminent in another sense. Notice in verse 18, it says he is also head of the body, the church, and he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he himself will come to have the preeminence in everything, or first place in everything, and through him to reconcile all things to himself, and so forth. So he's the firstborn in these two senses. He's the firstborn over all creation because all things were created through him. He's also the firstborn over the church, the kingdom of Christ, right? That's his kingdom, the church. He's also the head over the church and firstborn over it. He's the one who has the preeminence over it. Okay, so this ties in with what I was talking about before when I talked about God's kingdom, his providential kingdom, where he's the ruler over all the things that he created. Well, Jesus is the preeminent one over all things because he made all things. but he's also preeminent over all things in relation to the church. He became the head of the church by virtue of taking our nature on himself, becoming the second Adam, and conquering conquering death and rising from the dead, so that he is the firstborn of those that slept, the firstborn from the dead. So there are two senses in which we can speak of Christ being firstborn, but in both cases it refers to him as preeminent. He is firstborn, that is preeminent, over all of creation as creation's creator, and he is the firstborn over the body, the church, because he is the church's head to whom the church is united. He has risen from the dead, and therefore those who are united to him through faith are guaranteed that we too will be raised up as well. So that's the answer to Colossians 1:15. And once again, it doesn't contradict the Lord's deity. It's actually an affirmation of his deity.